The flight attendant approached me with that apologetic smile they reserve for unreasonable passenger requests. We were 30,000 feet above Kansas when she leaned in and whispered that a woman in economy was asking if I would consider switching seats with her son. I glanced through the curtain dividing business from coach and immediately recognized her. Patricia Hullbrook, the HOA president for my neighborhood in Pine Ridge Estates, sat there with her arms crossed and her face twisted into that familiar expression of entitled fury I had seen so many times at neighborhood meetings. She had already cornered me at the gate, insisting that HOA presidents deserved special consideration when it came to seating arrangements. Now, she was sending flight attendants to do her bidding. I took a sip of my complimentary bourbon, looked the attendant straight in the eye, and said, "No, thank you." The next 4 hours would become a master class in passive-aggressive warfare at 30,000 feet. My name is Daniel Foster, and I work as a software consultant specializing in municipal systems. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays well enough that I could afford to upgrade to business class using points for this trip to a tech conference in Phoenix. I had been looking forward to this flight for weeks, for hours of peace, decent food, and maybe getting some work done on my laptop without someone's elbow in my ribs. I moved to Pine Ridge Estates 3 years ago, attracted by the reasonable home prices and the promise of a quiet suburban life. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that the neighborhood was ruled with an iron fist by Patricia Hullbrook, a woman who treated the HOA presidency like she was running a small dictatorship. Every blade of grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches tall. Trash cans could only be placed at the curb between 6 p.m. the night before pickup and noon on pickup day. Christmas decorations were allowed from December 1st through January 2nd, not a day longer. Patricia and I had already crossed paths numerous times. She once fined me $75 because my mailbox was painted eggshell white instead of the approved pearl white. Another time, she measured the distance between my rose bushes and determined they were planted 6 inches too close together, violating Section 12.4.4 of the neighborhood guidelines. She even tried to fine me for working from home, too visibly, claiming that seeing me through my window during business hours created a commercial atmosphere that violated residential zoning aesthetics. The real trouble started when she discovered I was taking this flight. I made the mistake of mentioning it to my neighbor Tom while we were both getting our mail. Patricia must have been listening from behind her perfectly trimmed hedges because the next day she appeared at my door with her fake smile and asked about my travel plans. She mentioned she and her family were taking the same flight for their vacation to Scottsdale. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned I had upgraded to business class. 2 days before the flight, she sent me an email through the HOA portal suggesting we could work out a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the seating. I ignored it. She followed up with a handwritten note slipped under my door, proposing that as a community leader, she should have access to premium seating when traveling with residents. I threw it in the recycling bin, making sure to do so during the approved hours for paper waste disposal. At the airport, she found me at the gate and made her first direct attempt. She explained that her son Trevor had anxiety about flying and would benefit greatly from the extra space in business class. When I politely declined, she shifted tactics and said her husband, Robert, had a bad back from all his volunteer work maintaining the HOA common areas. I remained unmoved. Finally, she played what she thought was her trump card, reminding me that my annual HOA review was coming up and she had noticed my garage door was looking a bit weathered. Once we boarded and I settled into seat 3A, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Every 20 minutes, Patricia would walk through the curtain to use the business class bathroom, even though there were functional facilities in economy. Each time, she would pause at my row and make increasingly pointed comments. First, she remarked loudly to no one in particular that some people had forgotten the meaning of community. Then, she asked the businessman next to me if he knew that selfish neighbors made for toxic neighborhoods. By the second hour of the flight, her tactics had evolved into pure psychological warfare. She sent her younger son Kyle up to business class with a handwritten note that said, "Please, Mr. Foster, my mom says you could make our family vacation special." I handed it back without responding. She recruited an elderly woman from economy to ask me if I would consider switching with a loving mother. I politely explained that I had paid for my upgrade with points earned over 2 years of business travel. The flight attendants were growing increasingly frustrated with Patricia's behavior. She had pressed the call button 17 times with various complaints and requests, each one designed to be heard in business class. The coffee in economy was too cold. The snacks were stale. The seats did not recline far enough for a woman of her standing in the community. When a flight attendant finally told her she needed to remain in her seat and stop disturbing other passengers, Patricia demanded to speak with the captain. What Patricia did not realize was that the man sitting across the aisle from me in business class was recording her antics on his phone. Marcus Washington was a popular travel blogger who specialized in airplane horror stories, and Patricia was giving him content gold. Every time she stormed through the curtain with another complaint or passive-aggressive comment, his phone came out. Her speech about how HOA presidents were essentially government officials and deserved upgraded treatment was captured in its entirety. The situation reached its crescendo when Patricia attempted to organize what she called a peaceful protest in the aisle between business and economy. She stood up and announced that she was taking a stand against social inequality in aviation. She declared that business class was a symbol of everything wrong with society and that I, Daniel Foster of 1423, Maple Grove Lane, was perpetuating systemic unfairness by refusing to share my privilege with a hardworking family. The flight attendants immediately shut down her protest and informed her that if she did not return to her seat, they would have to involve the air marshal. Patricia sat down but continued her campaign of harassment through loud conversations with anyone who would listen. She told the entire economy section about how I had once left my garbage can at the curb until 12:30 p.m. A full 30 minutes past the deadline. She described in detail every minor infraction she had documented in my HOA file over the past 3 years. Things took an even more bizarre turn when Patricia produced a laminated copy of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA charter from her purse and began reading it aloud, claiming that Section 47.3 gave her authority over resident conduct even outside neighborhood boundaries. She insisted that my refusal to accommodate her family was a violation of the Community Harmony Clause, and that she would be issuing me a $500 fine upon our return. Several passengers started laughing, thinking this had to be some kind of performance art or hidden camera show. Patricia then attempted to conduct what she called an emergency HOA meeting at 30,000 feet. She nominated the confused elderly woman in seat 23B as secretary and tried to get the passengers around her to vote on a motion to censure me for conduct detrimental to community values. When nobody would second her motion, she declared them all in violation of Robert's Rules of Order and subject to penalties. Her husband Robert finally spoke up, telling her she needed to stop before she got arrested, but Patricia shushed him and said he was out of order. The breaking point came when Patricia tried to serve me with what she called an aerial cease and desist order. She had actually written out a formal complaint on airline napkins with a pen she borrowed from another passenger. She folded it into a paper airplane, which she thought was clever, and threw it into business class. It hit a sleeping passenger in the head, who woke up startled and spilled red wine all over his laptop. The man was furious and demanded to know who had thrown it. When the flight attendant pointed to Patricia, he threatened to sue her for destroying his presentation for $1 million contract negotiation. When we finally began our descent into Phoenix, I thought my ordeal was almost over. Patricia had spent the last hour of the flight shooting daggers at me through the curtain and muttering to her family about the decline of neighborly values. Her husband, Robert, looked embarrassed, and her sons seemed to be pretending they didn't know her. The businessman next to me leaned over and said he had never seen anything quite like it in 30 years of business travel. As we taxied to the gate, the captain made an unusual announcement, asking all passengers to remain seated after we reached the gate. 2 police officers and an airline supervisor boarded the plane and walked directly to Patricia's row. It turned out that her behavior had been reported by multiple passengers and crew members. She was escorted off the plane for questioning about potential interference with flight crew instructions, a federal offense. But the real consequences came after Marcus Washington posted his videos online. The footage of Patricia claiming HOA presidents deserve special treatment went viral within hours. The story was picked up by several news outlets as an example of entitled behavior gone wild. The Pine Ridge Estates HOA board called an emergency meeting when they returned from Phoenix. Residents who had suffered under Patricia's tyrannical rule for years finally had the ammunition they needed. The board voted unanimously to remove Patricia from her position, citing conduct unbecoming of a community representative. She was also banned from attending HOA meetings for 6 months and fined $3,000 for using her position to harass a resident outside of neighborhood boundaries. The airline added her to their watch list, requiring supervisor approval for all future bookings. Patricia stood at the special board meeting with her mouth hanging open as the vote was read.